It had been some weeks since Omotosho gave the judgment.
God will punish you, now and forever.
Weeks, the country stayed tense. People talked quietly about the case, but nothing loud happened. Most people simply went back to their daily lives. They worked, they cooked, they traveled, and they tried to forget the stress that came with the judgment. Even though the topic stayed in everyone's mind, the days still moved on. Omotosho himself tried to return to his normal routine. He went to work, handled files, signed documents, and tried to show that everything was fine. He kept a straight face in public, but inside him, things were not as calm. He felt heavy pressure from everywhere. Some people supported what he had done, while many others strongly disagreed. Letters, messages, and comments reached him every day. Some were polite, some were angry. He tried his best to ignore them, but the stress grew slowly, like a quiet storm building far away. His family noticed he was not his usual self. He looked tired more often. He ate less than before. Sometimes he stared into space as if thinking deeply about something he could not share. When his wife asked him if he was all right, he always gave the same answer, "I'm fine." But she knew he was only saying that to avoid worrying her. Then, one morning, something changed. The day started normally. The sky was calm, the air was light, and nothing looked strange. Omotosho woke up early as always. He took a shower, dressed, and prepared to leave the house. But just as he sat down to take his morning tea, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He tried to breathe slowly, thinking it would go away, but it did not. Instead, the pain became stronger. He placed his hand on his chest, bent forward slightly, and tried to call for help. His wife heard the sound of the chair hitting the floor and rushed into the sitting room. She saw him holding his chest, struggling to speak. She became frightened and shouted for their son to bring the car keys. She helped him sit up, but he could barely stay steady. His breathing became fast and unbalanced, and sweat started forming on his forehead. They quickly guided him outside. Every step he took seemed difficult. He kept his hand on his chest as if trying to hold the pain inside. When they reached the car, he almost fell, but his son caught him. They placed him gently in the back seat, and his wife sat beside him, holding his hand tightly. She kept calling his name, hoping he would answer clearly, but his voice was weak. The car moved fast out of the compound. His wife kept saying, "Stay with us. Just hold on. We are almost there." But he did not reply. His eyes were half open, and his breathing sounded deeper than normal. At every bump on the road, he winced, showing that the pain was still spreading through his body. When they got to the hospital, nurses rushed out with a stretcher. They lifted him carefully and pushed him toward the emergency room. His wife tried to follow, but one of the nurses asked her to wait outside. She stood there with her hands shaking, praying silently for something good to happen. His son walked up and down the hallway, unable to stay still. Inside the emergency room, doctors surrounded Omotosho. They checked his pulse, connected machines to him, and worked quickly to stabilize him. The doctors whispered to each other, but the family could not hear what they were saying. Minutes felt like hours. The news spread faster than anyone expected. A hospital staff member recognized him and made a quiet call. Within minutes, the information reached social media. The message moved from one phone to another, from one group to another. People began typing, "Omotosho has been rushed to the hospital." Some said it with shock, others with confusion. By afternoon, almost everyone had heard about it. Some wondered if it was stress. Others wondered if it was something more serious. No one knew the real cause, but everyone wanted to know what would happen next. The story was everywhere, on the radio, on trending lists, on message groups, and in conversations in bus stops and markets. Back at the hospital, the doctors continued their work. His wife sat on a chair, her heart heavy, praying for a miracle. His son kept staring at the emergency door, waiting for a doctor to come out. The day that started like any other had suddenly turned into a day of fear, questions, and silence. Omotosho, the same man who had made one of the country's most talked about judgments only weeks earlier, was now fighting for his health in a hospital room. No one expected it. No one was prepared for it. But the news had broken through the country like a loud echo. And nothing felt normal anymore. When the news reached Nnamdi Kanu's legal team, they were in their office, preparing documents for the next court hearing. It was a quiet morning, and everyone was focused on their work. The head lawyer, who was known for being calm and steady, was reading through a file when his phone started ringing non-stop. At first, he ignored it because he thought it was just another routine call. But when the phone did not stop ringing, he picked it up. The voice on the other end spoke quickly, as if struggling to put the words together. The lawyer listened carefully. His face changed slowly from calm to surprise. He asked the caller to repeat the information, just to be sure he heard it correctly. When he ended the call, he sat back in his chair, thinking deeply. The other lawyers in the room noticed his silence and looked at him. "What happened?" one of them asked. He took a deep breath before speaking. "It is about Hospitalization," he said. They all looked up immediately. "What about him?" another lawyer asked. "He has been rushed to the hospital." For a moment, the room became completely quiet. No one moved. No one said a word. It felt as if time had paused for them. They knew the judgment Hospitalization gave had brought a lot of tension in the country. They knew it had placed both their client and themselves under pressure. But none of them expected this sudden twist. The head lawyer placed the file on the table and leaned forward. He looked at the team and said, "This is serious news. We need to respond carefully." He was always known for thinking before speaking, and this situation required that same calmness. Another lawyer stood up and walked around the room. "Do you think people will try to connect this to the case?" he asked. "They will talk," the head lawyer replied. "People always talk. But we must stay clear and responsible." A few minutes later, journalists began calling, asking for comments. Some wanted quick quotes. Some wanted long interviews. They wanted to know how Kanu's legal team felt about Hospitalation's condition. They wanted to know if the lawyers believed this could change the flow of the case. The head lawyer agreed to speak to the press, but he asked them to gather outside the office instead of speaking to them one by one. When he stepped outside, many reporters were already waiting. They raised their microphones, cameras, and recorders, each person hoping to catch his exact words. He did not raise his voice. He did not frown. He spoke in the same calm tone he was known for. His message was simple, direct, and from the heart. He said, "We just want the truth. We are not happy that anyone is sick. We don't wish him harm. We want him to recover. Our stand has not changed. What we want is justice. What we want is fairness." He paused, then added, "We hope he gets better. But we also hope the courts will now look again at our client's situation. This may be the right time to correct the wrongs." The reporters wrote down every word. Some repeated the lines to confirm they heard correctly. They were expecting anger, or accusations, or strong political statements. But instead, the lawyer spoke with calmness and maturity. Inside the office, the other lawyers watched from the window. They whispered to one another about the situation. One of them said, "People will misunderstand this event. We must keep everything clear." Another said, "We must continue working on the appeal. This news may change things." After the head lawyer finished speaking, he returned inside. His team gathered around him. "What do we do now?" one asked. "We continue," he answered. "Our duty is still the same. We fight for fairness." The lawyers began discussing how the new development might affect the legal path. They talked about the pressure the court system was already facing. They discussed how the public might react. They talked about how some people might even think this was a sign that the case needed fresh review. But the head lawyer reminded them not to jump to conclusions. "We must stay disciplined," he said. "Our job is to follow the law, not rumors." Meanwhile, people outside the legal world were reacting strongly to the news. Many citizens shared their thoughts online. Some said the judgment had caused too much tension. Others said the situation was a warning. Many wondered what would happen next in the case. Through all of this, Kanu's legal team kept working. They gathered new documents. They prepared new arguments. They checked old files again. They wanted to be ready if the courts opened the door for a new hearing. The head lawyer continued to show a calm attitude. He spoke to the team again later in the day and repeated one message: "We do not celebrate anyone's pain. We want justice, not suffering. We want fairness, not revenge." That simple message became the center of their response. And because the words were clear and honest, many people respected the way the lawyers handled the situation. By the end of the day, the legal team understood one thing clearly: the case had entered a new stage. The nation was paying close attention. And everything they said or did from this point would matter even more. They did not know what the next week would bring, but they knew they had to keep moving forward with truth, calmness, and strength. As the news of Omotosho's sudden hospital admission spread across the country, people waited anxiously to hear updates. The hospital became the center of attention. Cars moved in and out, reporters stood outside with their microphones, and security officers stayed on guard to keep everything calm. Even though no one truly knew the full details of his condition, the atmosphere around the hospital felt heavy, like something important was happening behind the walls. Inside the hospital, doctors continued working to stabilize him. They monitored his heartbeat, checked his breathing, and gave him the care he needed. The hallways outside the emergency unit were quiet, except for the soft footsteps of nurses moving from one room to another. His wife stayed in the waiting area, trying to stay strong, even though she felt scared. She held her bag tightly on her lap, as if gripping it would stop her hands from shaking. His son sat beside her, staring down at the floor, lost in thought. The hospital staff tried to comfort them, telling them to stay hopeful, but neither of them could relax. Every minute felt long. Every door movement made them lift their heads. They wanted answers, but the doctors were still doing all they could. As hours passed, the public continued talking. Many people wondered what this would mean for the case that had shaken the nation only weeks earlier. Some believed this was a simple medical issue and nothing more. Others felt it might influence the legal process in some way. Rumors spread quickly, but none of them came from an official source. Everyone was waiting for a real update. Meanwhile, Nnamdi Kanu's lawyers kept working in their office. They gathered in a meeting room and discussed how the situation could affect the next steps. They were aware that the country was watching closely. They knew that every word they said and every move they made would be studied by the public. But they also knew they could not afford to stop working. Their responsibility to their client was still their top priority. The head lawyer reminded them again: "We must focus on what is important. We hope he recovers, but we also hope justice will take a new path. We have to be ready for any opening." The legal team continued preparing new documents, reviewing statements, and arranging files for a possible appeal. Even though the case had already gone through many stages, they believed there was still room to fight for fairness. They stayed calm, organized, and focused. Outside their office, reporters also gathered to hear their next steps. News stations wanted to know if the lawyers would push harder for a new hearing. Some journalists speculated that the sudden change in events might increase pressure on the court system. But the lawyers did not rush to make public comments. They wanted to wait for the right time. Back at the hospital, the doctors finally gave Omotosho's family a brief update. They said he was stable for the moment but still under close observation. They explained that the situation was serious, and he needed rest and careful monitoring. His wife nodded as she listened, although her eyes were filled with worry. She thanked them quietly before sitting back down. The news of his condition reached the media shortly after, and people reacted in different ways. Some prayed openly for his recovery. Others hoped the situation would bring calmness to the country. A few wondered if this event would change the direction of the case, but no one knew for sure. By evening, the nation was still waiting for more information. The internet was filled with discussions. People talked in their homes, at workplaces, in markets, and on buses. It was as if everyone felt the weight of something unknown approaching. The story had taken a new turn, and no one could predict where it would lead. As the day went on, the legal team met once again. They talked about the next court dates and the documents they needed to prepare. They discussed the public's reaction and how to handle the pressure. But the head lawyer ended the meeting with one clear message: "We will not stop. This case is bigger than one moment. We must stay steady and ready." While all this was happening, Nnamdi Kanu remained in detention, unaware of every detail but aware that something important had happened. His lawyers planned to visit him soon to explain the situation carefully and decide their next steps. Night eventually fell across the country. The hospital lights stayed bright, shining through the windows like small signals of hope. The lawyers continued working into the evening, and the public continued waiting for the next update. By the end of the night, one thing became clear: the story was not finished. The hospital admission had changed the direction of events. The case was no longer moving in a straight line. What would happen next? Whether the courts would open the door for a fresh review, whether Omotosho would recover quickly, whether the tension in the country would reduce, was now uncertain. Everyone waited. Everyone watched. Everyone felt that the days ahead would decide everything. And the nation held its breath, ready to see what would unfold next.